Welcome to the Author to Authority podcast. And today I am so looking forward to this conversation because there is so much sort of controversy over websites and whether they are effective or not. And so today's conversation, we're actually going to talk about how do you create website content? How do you make your content on your website so that people read it and actually want to keep reading it and take action? So if this is of interest to you, stay tuned. Like, do not turn off because it's going to be a wonderful conversation. I am so excited to welcome Jonny Holsten to the show. He's a messaging strategist, marketing consultant. He uses the StoryBrand Framework to help leaders find the right words for big moments. His passion is helping others communicate clearly, and he loves helping leaders clarify their message, engage their audience, and inspire action with the right words. Welcome to the show, Jonny.
Hey, Kim. Thank you so much for having me. This will be a fun conversation.
Well, you're on the right podcast, Author to Authority. It's all about the words.
Amen. Yep. Everything's always about the words. So you figured that out for sure.
So let me just ask you a question right off the bat, because this is something that I have personally thought of in the past. And can you actually create a website that converts, or should you just be happy having something there for people to look at?
Oh no, you definitely shouldn't just be happy with that. And of course, there are plenty of reasons a website might not convert outside of the message, but the message is the first start on kind of optimizing that conversion process, because you'll see that there's a lot of merit to, and this is not my strategy, but there's a lot of reason these clickbait crappy funnels convert for people, and that's because the messaging and the sales copy is so good. So I think there's an argument there of words is where you can start. Words is where you should start.
Oh, it's really funny. There was a gentleman I used to follow who taught on how to create low to no content books, things that
Mhm.
you could sell on Amazon, stuff like that. And his landing pages, like his sales pages, were like horribly designed.
Mm.
But you started to read, like, it was just all words. Like, there was no pictures, there was no not it was just all words. And by the time you'd finished like 3 or 4 paragraphs, you were already buying it because you were like, "Oh man, I really need this and I want to get into this and this product's going to help me." And of course, it was 27 bucks. So I mean, hey, or
Why
7 bucks
not?
or 17, right? So I think back on that and the fact that, here's this person who had like no design on his website whatsoever. It was just literally a block of text, broken up into paragraphs, and eventually there was a couple highlighted sentences and a buy now button.
Yes.
And like he suckered me in
There you
every
go.
single time.
Well, and that's all I think that just speaks, a lot of people spend thousands on their branding and thousands on a great website design. So I guess that just means you're even that much more set up for success if you're already investing all that in the design and the aesthetic and the credibility in your branding. Pairing that with the right words is just rocket fuel.
So let's get into this. You're gonna share your story in a little bit, but let's get into the story brand framework. It's most people, when they hear story brand, they have somewhat of understanding, but maybe just introduce the concept a bit, and then we'll go into it a bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite subjects to dive into, and the StoryBrand Framework is a marketing framework to help anybody clarify their message, and it's based on the 7 core principles of storytelling. So if you're like writing a screenplay or a movie or a in-depth story that you're writing a book on, as you know, there's really dozens of components to a really good story. But the beautiful thing about the StoryBrand Framework is it's really boiled it into the top 7 that work for marketing. And those 7 parts are: you have a character who has a problem that meets a guide who gives them a plan, calls them to action so they can find success and avoid failure. That's the end of the framework. And the difference with the StoryBrand framework is I think a lot of us know, or we all know, marketing and storytelling go hand in hand. The mistake that a lot of people make is they tell the story about themselves, or they make the story about their own brand or their own story. And not to say you can't talk about yourself at times, but it's too much of an emphasis on their own story and not enough of an emphasis on the customer's story, which is where the framework comes in. And in the framework, your character is the hero. The main character in this is the customer is the main character. And then your brand is positioned as the guide. And that is just a very successful formula for good marketing language. And it's a great filter when you're working on a content or writing a website or even making a speech or a keynote or anything. If your talking points fall outside of that framework, they're probably not going to move that. They're probably not going to help you help you have a clear message. So that's the high level on the StoryBrand framework.
I love it. I love it. And that is the thing. Just recently, I was back in Ontario. I'm in Nova Scotia right now. I was speaking at an event. I was trying out a new speech. And, one thing I've learned to do is even though I tell my story, because you're on stage and you're trying to get people to get to know you a little bit, create that relationship, I always kind of turn the story around. So, I tell my story, but I'll say to them, like, have you ever felt that way too? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to be invisible. I was tired of people making fun of me. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
many people in this room have felt like they've wanted to be invisible? So even though it was
Mm-hmm.
my story, I was encouraging them to be a part of my story.
Absolutely. That is the number one thing about good storytelling and marketing is it's got to be a story that the audience can enter into. And either you're going to enter into a story about them, or your story is so similar to theirs, they enter in and feel like it's about them. It's so powerful, and it works. And there's all sorts of science behind it, but I don't need to get that crazy with it, but you're on the money there.
Johnny, we're just going to take a quick ad break. Audience, if you're listening to this, RTI Publishing has lots of different resources for you, and we're going to take a quick 15 to 17-second break so that you can find out about one of the free things that we give away on this show. Writing and publishing a book that converts readers into client and scales your business is hard, but it doesn't have to be. Get my free checklist at bit.ly/create and scale that will show you what you need to do to have your book become a well-converting lead generating tool. Welcome back. Johnny, you gave us just such an amazing framework, and we're going to go into that just a little bit later, but I just want to back up a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about your story and how did you become a StoryBrand certified marketing guide?
Yeah, well, I have always been sort of on the mic or saying things in front of groups of people. And even when I was a young kid, I was hosting talent shows at school or emceeing sports tournaments and doing things where a lot of people were listening to whatever I decided to say. And after college, I worked for a little bit in sports broadcasting, and that was even on a bigger scale. And through all those experiences, I just really learned that the prep and the strategy behind the words you choose to say really matter. And all of those moments that you have, they're going to be remembered. And you're either going to be remembered for knocking it out of the park, or you're going to be remembered for maybe something funny or silly or stupid that you said in front of a bunch of people. So I loved that process of preparing and figuring out what the strategy was going to be, and started a marketing business after college, and really just settled in the space of helping people find the right words for their marketing and communications, which just sort of has always gone in line with what I've enjoyed doing, and the strategy behind that. And marketing and websites, of course, is a huge application, but then also applying the same process to any situation where there's people listening to what you have to say. It's an opportunity to capitalize on. And that's what got me into it. I came across the StoryBrand framework as I was working on my own messaging and working on my own marketing for my business years ago, and was just like, wow, this really clicks with everything that I'm about. And in the following year, got certified and made it the focus of my business. And since then, that's been all that I do, is help people with their language and their wording, and occasional copywriting here and there to take that wording and and use it as a training tool for the client or something like that. But that's my backstory and how I ended up where I am right now.
I could just picture you doing these talent shows and getting up there on the microphone, and because you have such a naturalness. There's no nervousness with you. You're very natural. I can tell
Thank
that,
you.
the microphone is your friend. You've done this
Hmm.
one before. Uh so kudos to you. One thing I was thinking about when you were talking is the fact that I think sometimes consistency in messaging is important too. Like I
Hmm.
think if you're going to build out this messaging on your website, then that messaging should be consistent throughout all of the things that you do. Like if people see your website and then they're seeing you on social media, or you're on a podcast, or
Hmm.
whatever, there should be consistency throughout all of that. Like it's not that you only have one story, but I think a lot of the themes should be the same. What do you think, Johnny?
You are spot on. And part of my process is we'll clarify the message and the story, and then part of moving it forward is figuring out how many different ways can we say the same exact thing, and that way you're not repeating the same line to exactly what you said over and over again, but you're saying the same thing over and over again. And I argue that the biggest skill in marketing is discipline half of the time, and in marketing and communication, because you need to have the discipline to stay on message and not waste your opportunity for marketing touch points or any sort of communication touch point. And having the message is the first step. Sticking to it and being cohesive and consistent with it is the next dragon you got to slay. But you can't get there without the message first. But yes, I completely agree with that.
I don't know about you, Johnny, but the thesaurus is one of my really good friends.
It has to be, right?
Well, because sometimes, like you do, like you're saying the same things over and over again, and you want to change it up. Now, because I'm a writer, I find in writing it's even more critical that you're not using the same words over and
Yeah.
over. It makes the writing boring, it's less engaging. And so
Mhm.
I've learned to increase my vocabulary. And it didn't hurt that my best friend, the Thoris, I think, slept with her at night. She was such a vocabulary person. So she always talked about, Kim, your writing's not delicious today. There's no delicious words in your writing today.
The thesaurus, just like the mic, can be your best friend.
So, Johnny, let's go deeper. I'm going to let you loose for a little bit to go deeper into the story brand framework. And, how can, say an entrepreneur, a consultant, a speaker, a coach, how can they start to implement this in their business?
Yeah, that's a great question. The very first thing I would always recommend anyone is to read the book on the framework called Building a Story Brand, and it's behind me to my left. You probably see it up there, Building a Story Brand, and it's the best $20 you will probably ever spend if you're a communicator, a leader of any kind. It'll just be a good crash course on the framework and why it works. Most importantly, why it is actually successful and sort of the science behind it and how to stick to it. But the number one thing that I really say is when in any organization, no matter how big or small, if it's a solopreneur or a
Mm.
company with massive departments and massive teams, in every communication, there is a hero and there is a guide in every context. It doesn't matter if it's a one-on-one meeting or an organizational all hands meeting or a big conference where the whole company is together. Your sales language, your marketing language, in every single communication, there's a guide and a hero. And so I always think that, and I'm not, and I'm biased in this regard, but I do think the a core value of every company should be to play the guide, and just sort of like think about how you can play the guide in every context. And in a practical sense, um, as you move forward with your preparation for, let's say, a speech or a keynote or a pitch or a presentation, using that framework to just jot out your talking points and making it focused on the person who's listening is a great start. Um, And then on a marketing level, I would start on the website, like we kind of talked about at the beginning, and scroll through that and say, even if you want to get real old school with it, you can literally print out your website page from a printer and sit down with your team and say, okay, we're only going to circle the things that position our customer as the character in the story and us as the guide. It's a really good exercise because I think a lot of people will find out that they are probably scratching out most of, if not all of the stuff on the homepage of their website. And then to their credit, a lot of the stuff where they play the guide and probably speak clearly is actually deeper down and hidden on the website and other pages, because that's just a lot of people's natural inclination is like, oh, if they want to read more, they'll read more and they'll dig deeper. But in today's, man, when we talk about a website that converts, what we're really always competing with our website and our marketing, it's not even our competitors. It's not even our product credibility. It's almost always TikTok on the phone of our customer that's always in their pocket, or the email that gets another email in the inbox. We're competing with those things. So the shortest and clearest language that positions your customer as the hero gives you a fighting chance at winning against all those other things. So that is just a bunch of ways you can get started with it. But read the book, use the framework to filter your talking points for your next big communication or next marketing collateral, and then go back and look at your website and just cross out things that don't position you as the guide, and go from there.
Let's go into that a little bit deeper because, I think sometimes, we hear, okay, we got to position ourselves as the guide, but what does that kind of look like in terms of, when you're creating your messaging? How do you present yourself as the guide?
Yeah, that's an amazing question, because that is really what sets the guide apart in the framework. Is there's a few reasons that the idea of playing the guide works, and when you look at all of the famous movies and literature and examples that and examples in history that have a strong guide in any story, the guide has undergone a few things. They mostly have overcome the problem that the character in the movie is struggling from. So my favorite example is Haymitch in the Hunger Games. He is he's actually got a lot of challenges with his life. He's an alcoholic. He's kind of a nut job. He's all over the place, but he understands what Katniss is going through, and he has won the Hunger Games himself. So those are the two elements of being the guide in the StoryBrand framework: is empathy plus authority. So as a brand, showing empathy and saying, we understand, and there's a few ways you can do it. You can either say, we understand the problem you're going through directly, and that you personally know what it feels like. That's a lot of good stuff for thought leaders and or consultants. And then the other way you can do it is just say, we've seen too many people like you suffering from, the insert problem. That's better for a bigger brand, a bigger organization. So lead with empathy, and then come in strong with the authority. And the authority, it's all your classic bread and butter marketing authority. So that is your certifications, your testimonials, logos of brands you've worked with, data that backs up your results, things like that. So empathy, it makes us likable, and it's the human touch that people need. And then authority is what makes us trustworthy to actually solve the problem. So that's the science of playing the guide. And then the last point to it is, in almost every movie where the guide comes in to play or book, would be that they don't come in until the character is suffering from a problem. So that's the other way to play the guide: is lead with the problems that your customer is experiencing. Mm-hmm. Lead with that, then introduce yourself as the guide, because now they know why you're there to help. And that's the ultimate storm and ultimate recipe. Same applies for a presentation or website or email. Start with the problem, empathy, authority, and you've played the guide.
Thank you. That was it's one of those days. It's getting close to Christmas. I am tired, and the word just went right out of my head.
I am with you.
I appreciate you going more in depth with that, because, the thing is that we hear these things and it's like, okay, but how do you apply it?
Mhm.
you know? For me, if I'm, listening to a video or reading a book, right? It's great to know the what and the why, but at least give me some how, like get me started on the road so I feel like I'm at least moving forward. Maybe that's just me, I don't know, but I'm kind of like, oh, if you don't give me any how, I'm just going to go away and frustrated because I want, I'm the type of person I want to implement these things.
Yeah.
One of the amazing things about doing a podcast is I get to interview people like you, experts in different areas. And then I get off the call and I'm like, okay, and sometimes like you'll see me glance down very briefly because I'm making a note to myself, okay, I need to do this, right?
Mm.
Because
Mhm.
it's my feeling as an entrepreneur is that, it's great to learn all these things, but if you don't implement them, if you don't use them, then why bother?
Yeah, there's no use to it. That's part of the issue with the information age that we're in today is you just get bombarded with ideas and things that you could implement and could track down, and um, it's hard to stay on track sometimes. And I would say to make it extra practical for someone who's like ready to rock and roll with this, it is as simple as just jotting down your own, like reading the book, jotting down your own story brand framework. And then once you've had the paradigm shift of playing the guide and you've gotten your thoughts on paper, you've processed all your ideas and you've created your framework, from there, it really is just business as usual, but you're writing different, you're talking different, and you're pursuing things a little differently. So, um, yeah, to make it seem less overwhelming, that is where that's the kind of the way I would go about it.
Love it, love it. So, Johnny, we're going to start wrapping things up here. So, I would love for you to share a few final thoughts. And then, if someone has listened to this and they're like, oh man, I really got to connect with Johnny, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I think this has been a really good conversation, and it's always fun to share what I'm passionate about, and then also hopefully help somebody else take some nuggets and run with them, even if it's just the
Mhm.
next email they write or just updating their language on the website. It's always fun, and yeah, just final thoughts would be what we already talked about. Just there's always a guide and a hero, and the more you play the guide, the more of an impact you can make, and selfishly probably the better your business will do in the long run and the more you'll be able to help people. So that's the closing thought. And how to connect with me more, I'm on LinkedIn, Jonny Holsten, Jonny, no H, Holsten, Holsten. And then my website, southmountainmessaging.com. That's a great place to, if you want to book a time to chat with me about any of this, if this has your wheels turning on things you might want to change in your messaging, that's a great place to get something booked fast without having to message back and forth. So welcome to do that. And I'd love to meet anyone out there who has enjoyed listening to this. And thank you, Kim, for the great conversation.
Oh, you're very welcome, Johnny. If you're still listening, you're still tied in, and you want to know where to go to next, I recommend episode 440, The Power of a Personal Brand as an Author, with Chase Neely. So if you're watching here on YouTube, you will see the thumbnail somewhere on the screen. Depends where my daughter put it today. And if you are on your podcast app, you're going to be scanning back a little bit, because I'm not even sure what episode number this is, but we're well past 440. But scan yourself back to 440 with Chase Neely. Thank you so much for listening, audience. It's been a joy and a pleasure, and we will see you on the very next episode. Bye now.